بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وآله وصحبه وسلم. قد قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he now knew for certain that he was a prophet, a messenger that was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most merciful, the most generous. So when Jibreel alayhi salam came to the Prophet Muhammad sallam for a second time after Fatrat al-Wahi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to him the verses Ya ayyuhal muddathir qum fa'anzir wa rabbaka fakabbir wa thiyabaka fatahhir wa rujza fahjur. That all you Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam who is enveloped in your garments, arise and warn. And your Lord Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you will magnify, and your garments purify. And so these verses announced to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that the past, with its calmness and its rest, it was all over with. And before him lays a monumental mission, one that requires preparedness, it requires vigilance, it requires patience, it requires hard work. And so these are the first set of verses that were revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he was commanded to convey the teachings of Islam. They were meant to motivate Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam into action and to encourage him to live up to the duties that he was entrusted with. That he won't have to worry about any obstacles that come in his way because he is the messenger of Allah. He needs to focus on fulfilling his mission. And the first verse, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, Al-Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the one who's enveloped in garments. It was now time to bid farewell to the days of rest and comfort. This call was followed up by a positive command, Qum fa'anzir. This idea of warning. You have to stand and warn people. And it's interesting to note, because in other verses in the Quran, Rasulullah ﷺ is mentioned as being both a bashir and a nadhir. A bashir is what? A bashir is someone who is the bearer of glad tidings. Someone to deliver good news to people. And if you follow the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will surely be granted paradise. But here in this, he's only told to warn. Warning only. And this was to notify Rasulullah ﷺ that his message was going to be met with resistance. And that in consequence, it will be met with patience. You have to have patience. There will be struggle that's going to be required of him. وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. And magnify your Lord. This means do not magnify anything from the creation. Do not think anything that people that attack you, people that try to hurt you, there's no greatness in that. Do not fear them. Do not glorify and magnify anyone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All glorification and praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. He has no partner. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. And your garments purify. This is true. It's true that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam up until this point has been pure and noble his entire life. That's his nature. That's who he is at his base. That's what he was created upon. This is what we believe as Muslims. But now that he sallallahu alayhi wasallam is endowed with those qualities to prepare for this day, but from now on he will need to become even more pure, become even more honorable in your character, because from this time forward, you're not just an example to the Quraysh, you're not just an example to your family, you're not just an example to the men in your town, to your children, to your sons and your daughters, but now you are going to be an example of all of mankind, both the jinn and the human beings. So in order to properly convey the message of Islam, you will have to be complete in character and your level of patience and your overall goodness. وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ. And keep away, ar-rujz, the idols. And it is as if this is being said to the Prophet ﷺ previously, it was due to the nature of the purity of Allah, the purity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to the Prophet ﷺ, that he always stayed away from idol worship. He always stayed away from idol worship. He never worshipped an idol his entire life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But now he keep doing the same. But now with the intention of doing so for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Jibreel alayhi salam, it's during these early phases where Jibreel alayhi salam came and informed the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu about wudu and salah. About how to perform the wudu and how to perform salah. So the first installment was the tahajjud prayer, as we discussed last week. And then after the tahajjud prayer, Fajr and Asr became what was obligatory. So when salah came down, what was obligatory on the Muslims was tahajjud. Then that obligation was removed and only 2 salahs were obligated, which was Fajr and Asr. And then during the journey of Isra wal Mi'raj, those obligations remained, Fajr and Asr, and 3 more were added. Right? Dhuhr, Maghrib, and Isha, which led to the 5 prayers. Now when it comes to the da'wah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it can be broken down into 3 parts. There is the da'wah sirriya, which is the secret private da'wah. And this happened in the first 3 years. And there is the da'wah jahriya, which is the public da'wah, that happened without physical engagement. They were commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that during this time when you are giving da'wah, if anybody comes and attacks you, anybody comes and harasses you, anybody comes and tries to poke the bear, do not engage. Be patient. And then there was a third phase where there was a public da'wah, but with defense. Right? There was physical engagement. That now, you know, got the strength in numbers. Somebody tries to mess with you, you know, enough said. This occurred after the migration, the hijrah from Mecca to Medina. So Rasulullah ﷺ started with this da'wah sirriya, the secret da'wah, and he started giving da'wah to the people that were closest to him. Now it's the unanimous consensus of the scholars that Khadija radiallahu anha was the first to accept. Right? And this is evident that when Rasulullah ﷺ came back and told her what happened, what did she say? Allah will never forsake you. Allah will never forsake you. Now she didn't know exactly what was going on, but she knew that something was happening, and so therefore the scholars say that Khadija radiallahu anha is the first to accept and be by the side of Rasulullah ﷺ. She's also the first person other than Rasulullah ﷺ to recite the Quran, to repeat the ayats of the Quran. Then after Khadija radiallahu anha, you know, we talked about Waraqa bin Nawfal a little bit last week. Then after Waraqa bin Nawfal, the second amongst the family of Rasulullah ﷺ was Ali radiallahu anhu. Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, who was the cousin of Rasulullah ﷺ, the young cousin of Rasulullah ﷺ. So Abu Talib was his uncle, and Abu Talib was the one who essentially raised the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Taught him how to be a man, taught him how to be a good husband, taught him how to be a good businessman, taught him how to be a loving individual, a respectful individual. Abu Talib was a very good man. Now Abu Talib, he was not a wealthy person. He had a big family. So when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had his own family and wealth, he offered to Abu Talib to help him by taking one of his kids to help lessen the burden. So Ali radiallahu anhu was raised in the house of Rasulullah ﷺ. One day Ali ibn Abi Talib, right, you know, some narrations say that it was the day after. Like the day after the Prophet ﷺ received message, the revelation, the day after Ali radiallahu anhu saw the Prophet ﷺ worshipping Allah. And he was 10 years old. And when he saw this, he asked the Prophet ﷺ what was going on. The Prophet ﷺ explained to him and said that he wants to accept Islam. However, he needs to ask his father first. He doesn't want to anger his father, Abu Talib. Rasulullah ﷺ said, go home, think about it, but I prefer if you don't ask him. Because I want to be the one to present Islam to Abu Talib. I don't want any confusion. So, one night, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he accepted Islam. And Ali radiallahu anhu, he was afraid of how his father Abu Talib would respond about his acceptance to Islam. So he stayed a few weeks at Rasulullah's house instead of going regularly to visit his parents. So since Islam was very new at the time, Rasulullah was commanded to keep it within the home. Now Ali radiallahu anhu, he wanted to respect Rasulullah's wishes, so he did not talk about it openly. So Ali did not tell his father about the divine revelations and prayers. Now, during this time that Ali radiallahu anh would live in the house of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would visit his parents almost on a daily basis. So he lived with the Prophet ﷺ, who provided his cost of living, raising him as a child, and Ali radiallahu anh would visit his parents almost every day. But because he was afraid of his father's rejection, he went 3 weeks without visiting his parents. He was very nervous about telling his father. Now, there are some narrations that say that Ali radiallahu anh accepted Islam a year after revelation began. But these narrations are, the more authentic ones say that he actually accepted Islam very quickly after the first revelation. However, you can actually reconcile these two narrations together. It's actually very easy to reconcile these two narrations, because you need to acknowledge that Ali radiallahu anh is a child. Ali radiallahu anh is a child, and he kept his Islam very quiet. Nobody knew about his Islam except the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and maybe Khadija radiallahu anha. So as a child, he did not have a lot of interaction with other adults. So it was only a year later when other people started to realize that Ali radiallahu anh had joined the ranks of the believers. So therefore, they say this is where you can reconcile the two narrations. Ali radiallahu anh, he never bowed in front of an idol. He is one of those companions who receives the honor of never bowing in front of an idol, which is why he receives the title Karramullahu wajha. Sometimes when people say the name of Ali radiallahu anh, they say what? Karramullahu wajha. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honor his face, right? Honored is his face. Because his face never bowed down to an idol. Then there is a young boy who was around teenage years at this point by the name of Zayd bin Haritha. Zayd bin Haritha was a freed slave. And he was known as Zayd ibn Muhammad amongst the people. Because when he was a little boy, he had wandered off one day to play. And there was a caravan that passed by and saw the boy on his own and snatched him up. This was unfortunately something that was very common, right? Pre-Islam. So the caravan brought the boy to Mecca, and then he was sold as a slave. One of Khadija radiallahu anha's cousins named Hakim bought Zayd and gifted Zayd to Khadija as a marriage gift. Khadija then gifted Zayd to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam freed him. However, the character of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam made Zayd ibn Haritha want to stay with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and in the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he would take up the obligation and take up the task of running small errands for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If he needs some groceries, he needs something for his business, needs some help around the house, he would run errands for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Shortly after revelation, Zayd ibn Haritha was also exposed to the three people praying. Who were these three people now? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Khadija radiallahu anha, and who's the third? Ali radiallahu anhu, karramallahu wajha. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained Islam to Zayd, and then Zayd bin Haritha, he also became a believer. Now, if you kind of want to imagine for a second, kind of like a scene shift in your mind, if we're looking at the Seerah, on another side, what's happening is the father of Zayd bin Haritha is looking for Zayd. His boy got taken away, he did not know where he went. And Haritha himself would recite a lot of poetry about the loss of his son, about longing for his son. And his poetry was so powerful and beautiful that it eventually became viral and famous around Arabia, about this father who was emotionally tormented about the loss of his son Zayd. So this story of the father's search for his son eventually reached Mecca. And people think that there's some familiarity between Haritha's story and a slave by the name of Zayd who lives in their city. So some people ask Zayd if he remembers his father's name. And Zayd replied, yes, my father's name is Haritha, and he is from such and such tribe. So news reached Haritha that his son Zayd is found and lives in Mecca. And so Haritha then he rushes to Mecca with his brother, excited to get his son back. And so Haritha found that Zayd was under the care of a person by the name of Muhammed ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Haritha and his brother recognize the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the grandson of the great Abdul Muttalib. They have heard only great things about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they know him as As-Sadiq al-Amin. He was known for this. So they told the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, please return our son to us. We realize he's a slave and he was given to you. We'll pay whatever you want, just let him come home. Now the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was moved by his father's emotions. And at the same time, the Prophet ﷺ understood the relationship that he and Zayd had built. So this is actually of the emotional intelligence of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that he wanted to make sure that both Zayd ibn Haritha and his father are going to be okay in this situation. So he says, I'll call Zayd and let him make the decision. He's a young adult at this point, teenager, right? Teenagers back then weren't like teenagers now. By the time you were a teenager, you already knew how to do a 360 no scope off a horse. It was crazy with an archer, a bow and arrow. But, that's for another time. We can rant about that all day. So Zayd ibn Haritha, he had to make a decision. So he was called and he asked, and he recognized his father, he recognized his uncle. And so they embraced, they have a reunion, they have a beautiful moment together. And so the Prophet ﷺ told Zayd that, this man wants to take you back home, right? But you're a young man now. You can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. And so Zayd ibn Haritha, he thinks about it. He looks at his father and he says, I would like to stay here with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now Haritha was surprised. My son, you're a slave. You'll choose slavery over your own family? And so Zayd bin Haritha, he said, my father, I found something here that I can't find anywhere else. Islam. I can't find that anywhere else. I'm grateful to see that you are all fine, but I can't leave the company of this messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I can't leave the company. And so Zayd bin Haritha now, he teaches us what it really means to love the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam more than anything else in the world, even your own family. Right? And it's beautiful. It's beautiful really because we think about it and our natural reaction may be how could this be? How could I, as an individual, 1400 years later, be told that I have to love the Prophet ﷺ more than my own parents? How could I do that? When the parents of Rasulullah wasn't the one who raised me. My parents are the ones who raised me. My parents are the ones who fed me. My parents are the ones who spent long nights when I was a baby, sleepless nights trying to take care of me. So how am I supposed to love the Prophet ﷺ more than my own parents? Well, the answer to that is quite simple. This is why knowledge is important. This is why an understanding of the Quran and the Hadith of our beloved Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is important. On the Day of Judgment, who's going to care about you more than their own selves? Nobody. Illa Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ. The Day of Judgment is the day where what? Your brother, your friends, your mother, your father, your wife, your children, all of them will be like, I don't even know who this dude is. I don't even know who she is. I'm worried about myself today. Even the Anbiya alayhimus salam, to no fault of their own, because that's just how great that day is going to be. How mighty that day is going to be. They will say, I'm worried about myself today. Illa Rasulullah. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be the only one who will go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and plea to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until every single one of the believing Muslims enter paradise. Even the ones that enter hellfire for some time and are pulled out and brought into paradise eventually. Right? Now, obviously, with that being said, we don't even want to spend a millisecond in there. It's a horrible experience. So we want to go straight to Jannah, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant that to us. So we understand this and we're like, of course. Of course that makes sense. And one of the beautiful things about loving Allah and His Messenger more than your own parents and family is that your relationships actually get better, not worse. If you do this right, you do this the way you're supposed to do, right? This doesn't mean that I neglect my family, because again, this is why knowledge is important. Because Allah and His Messenger commanded me to what? To be the best to my family. The best of you are the ones who are what? The best to their families, and I am the best to my family. This is what Rasulullah ﷺ said, which is why he is the best amongst us. So now when we understand that our love of Allah and His Messenger actually makes our relationships better, not worse. As opposed to if our wives, our family members, our children were above Allah and His Messenger, then what's stopping me from committing an injustice against them? If I'm not loyal to Allah and His Messenger, and I don't fear injustice, then what's stopping me from committing injustice against my loved ones? So actually what? What did I say? That loving Allah and His Messenger first actually makes your relationships better. So Haritha, however, he couldn't understand this. He was distraught. So Rasulullah ﷺ was moved by both the father's emotions and the devotion of Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu anhu. So Rasulullah ﷺ said to Haritha, don't worry. I have adopted Zayd as my own. He's no longer a slave. He's my son. This is why he was called Zayd ibn Muhammad. He was known as Zayd ibn Muhammad because I adopted him as my son. And so Haritha stayed for a few days and left content, knowing that his son was with his family. And Zayd ibn Haritha was known as such, as the son of Muhammad, Zayd ibn Muhammad. Now, later on, in the Medina period, the Quran prohibited that he be named Zayd ibn Muhammad. ادعوهم لآبائهم هو أقسط عند الله. That let your adopted children keep their family names. This is more just in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So in our deen, adoption is, something that is a part of our deen. You can, adopting orphans, adopting people into families is a part of our deen. But if you do adopt someone, you want to keep their family name, because lineage is one of those maqasid al-sharia that Islam came to protect. One of the things that Islam came to preserve is lineage. So you can have someone and be like, he's like family, but it has to be very clear who he is. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then prohibited that people be called names that weren't actually given to them, or a lineage that wasn't actually given to them. So then from there on forward, he was known as Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu anhu. And his son, he was a part of the close family of the Prophet ﷺ. Not just him, but even his son, Usama bin Zayd, was like a grandson to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Usama bin Zayd was one of those companions where, subhanAllah, he's one of those companions where whenever there was something dire or serious amongst the companions, and maybe somebody was too embarrassed to talk to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, or too shy that the Prophet ﷺ would get angry at them, they would send who? Usama bin Zayd. They would send Usama bin Zayd. Because they knew that Usama bin Zayd was so beloved by the Prophet ﷺ, they can't get mad at Usama bin Zayd. So there's something that happened amongst the companions that might have upset the Prophet ﷺ, and he has to be informed about it. They would send Usama bin Zayd to tell him the news. Right? He would act as the intermediator. And Zayd ibn Haritha, he has a special honor. What's that honor? That very special honor that he has. Anybody know? Very special virtue of Zayd. Yeah. Yes, Zayd. Yes. Of course you would know that, right? Yeah. So Zayd told us that Zayd is the only companion that is mentioned by name in the Quran. Also in Surah Al-Ahzab. فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْدٌ مِنْهَا وَطَرًا زَوَّجَنَاكَهَا لِكَيْ لَا يَكُونَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ حَرَجٌ. إلى الآية. All of the Prophet's daughters, Zainab, radiallahu anha, Kulthum, Fatima, Ruqayya, radiallahu anhum, they all raised to embrace Islam. Even before Islam, they benefited from the noble character of their father. So they knew that their father was someone who was upright. Right? He stayed away from the evils of the polytheistic Quraysh society. So with their acceptance of Islam, Rasulullah's household became the first family from this nation that believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and practiced the teachings of Islam, which is why it is important among the believer. It is extremely crucial in the heart of the believer to love the family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to have a deep sense of love for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Someone going to the extremes of this does not mean you have to go to the opposite extreme. Do you understand what I'm saying? Someone going to the extreme of loving the Prophet Muhammad's family, that it causes them to have aqeedah issues, does not mean that now you have to go and find reasons and flaws in the Prophet Muhammad's family. That's not appropriate as a believer either. We're balanced people. One extreme breeds the other, but the Muslim is someone who's wasat, who is balanced. We don't go to opposite extremes. So of the blessed virtues of the Ahl al-Bayt, the family of the Prophet ﷺ, is that the Quran was first recited after verses of it were revealed in the cave of Hira. So the Quran was recited in what? The house of Khadija radiallahu anha. The first follower of the Prophet ﷺ resided in the Ahl al-Bayt. Prayer was first established amongst the Ahl al-Bayt. The three first believers gathered together in the Ahl al-Bayt. Khadija radiallahu anha, Ali radiallahu anhu, Zayd bin Haritha. Each individual member pledged support to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and each one of them fulfilled that support. So it was truly an ideal Muslim family. Right? The relationship of the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija radiallahu anha embodies the meaning in the verse هو الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وجعل منها زوجها ليسكن إليها فلما تغشاها حملت حملا خفيفا فمرت به. That it is He who created you from a single person, Adam alayhi salam, and then He created from him his wife in order that he might enjoy the pleasures of living with her. Right? فلما أثقلت دعوى الله ربهما لأن أتيتنا صالحا لنكونن من الشاكرين. That, Adam alayhi salam and Eve alayhi salam, when she became pregnant and carried the children, it started off light and then it became heavy, and they both invoked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saying, if you give us a salih, good, respectful child, we shall indeed be amongst those who are grateful. So the way in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Khadija anha raised their children embodies the meaning that is alluded to in this verse, and also in the hadith, that every single newborn is born upon the fitrah, the inborn disposition of being a Muslim. Then it's his parents who might guide him or misguide them. And so the Prophet's children were amongst those who were upon the fitrah. And then the parents raised them in such a way that they remained on the fitrah. And so Islam places a great importance both on society and the individual, and the individual is introduced into society by means of a family. So it's within this context of a family that individuals develop their characters and their qualities. Therefore, the family acts as an intermediary between the individual and society. Right? If the intermediary is sound and good, then the entities, the individual society, will be strengthened and improved. But this is why Islam stresses the importance of family. Each family must be a strong link in the establishment of an Islamic society. So we see this important. We see this in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We see how da'wah was given to the young, Ali radiallahu anhu. We see how da'wah is given to our spouses, right? It's important to speak about Islam and teach each other Islam and hold each other accountable. The reality is, this family really is the base of every society. If you have strong family units, you'll have strong society. If you don't, you won't have a strong society. It just comes back to family. It always comes back to family. That's why it's so important in our deen. Now, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu was the first person outside of the family of the Prophet ﷺ to accept Islam. And this was a very special moment to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, because it gives hope to the Prophet ﷺ that what? That he may be able to go public with this message. That there are people outside of my family that are willing to accept this message. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is 2 years younger than the Prophet ﷺ. They were friends. They've known each other since the Rasulullah ﷺ was about 10 years old. You know, we covered when the Prophet ﷺ was traveling to Syria when he was around the age of 12 years old. One narration in Tirmidhi indicates the possibility that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was actually on that journey with him. They knew each other from a very, very young age. They were best friends already before Wahy. They were best friends. So he knew who he was, he knew his character. And when Islam was presented to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he did not hesitate at all. There was zero reluctancy. And he was the only one that accepted right away. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where Rasulullah ﷺ, he says, I have not invited anyone towards Islam except that they experience some type of hesitation, some type of wavering, some type of uncertainty for, even if it was just a few moments, a few minutes. Let me think about it for a second. Let me sleep on it. Illa Abu Bakr. That when he never hesitated. When I mentioned to him, when I invited him to Islam, he did not waver in it, in his decision to accept Islam. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he once had a dispute with the companion Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. And they brought the matter up, subhanAllah. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, they had some interesting disputes in their lives. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ and even after the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But if you know anything about the relationship, wallahi, it seemed like a big brother dispute. They loved each other so much, the two of these individuals. They were they were the best of best friends. If Abu Bakr as-Siddiq wasn't best friends with the Prophet ﷺ, he would have been best friends with Umar ibn Khattab. So, with such a muhabba for one another, with such love for one another, what happens? Disagreements. It happens amongst best friends, amongst big brothers and little brothers. That's just something that happens. So whenever you see these kind of like disputes between companions, it's not what you think, really. Right? These people loved each other a lot. So anyways, they had a dispute, and they brought the matter up with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent me as a messenger to you all. And what did you all say to me? Everybody responded to me saying, you lie. But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he said, you speak the truth. I was sent by Allah as a messenger and a prophet to all of you. And all of you said at some point that I am a liar. Right? Now, let's pause here. How is he saying this with Khadija radiallahu anha, Aisha radiallahu anha, Zayd ibn Haritha? The indication here is that he's talking to people outside of the family of the Prophet ﷺ, not the family of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said that I was speaking the truth. He supported me. He aided me with his life. He aided me with his money. So now will you treat him badly? Will you treat my best friend badly now? You have to give him the respect that he deserves. You can have disagreements with him, but you have to respect him. So from that day on, no one ever misbehaved with Abu Bakr Siddiq because they understood what he meant to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So just like that, because the Prophet Muhammad's favorite companion is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, he is also our favorite companion too. Something that we can learn about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq's conversion to Islam is a few things. Number one is that he was willing to invest his entire life, his money, his body, his intellect, his cause, when the mission was still so small, was still nothing. There are more people in this room right now who are Muslim than at this time. And he was willing to sacrifice his entire life for it. What this teaches us is that if there's ever a good cause, a noble effort that's small in number, don't wait for the numbers to grow before you are willing to invest into that cause. I'm not just talking about financially, I'm talking about investing in people, investing in human beings. Join that cause. Be a part of the early start of it. Because Rasulullah ﷺ, amongst the companions, there were those who accepted early, those who accepted later, and those who accepted later always regretted it. Those who accepted later are better than any of us here in this room. But they were like, man, we had opportunities to be that first three. To be the ones that defended the Prophet ﷺ in his assassination attempts of the Quraysh. We had a chance to be one of those people. But we didn't. Right? We waited until Islam was stronger before we joined. And so they regretted it. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, he stood by the Prophet ﷺ's side because he believed in what he was teaching. He believed in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He grew up with him. He knew who he was. He knew the man that was speaking to him. Now the question is, if I have questions, if I have doubts about the deen, I have thoughts, Shaitan whispers in my heart, am I not on the sunnah of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh? Well, it depends. Right? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he knew the man that was speaking to him. One thing that is extremely important when it comes to raising children in Islam is it really has to come from the parents first. Sending your kids to Sunday school and expecting the college student, the MSA student, to teach your kids the deen from A to Z is going to be a problem. I say that because I was that college student. And I remember there was multiple students in my class when I was teaching Sunday school. I would teach them how to pray. And they would tell me, why should I pray? And I would explain to them, why should I pray? And they said, no. Why should I pray specifically? Me. I'm like, what do you mean? And they say, my parents don't pray. Why should I do it? Right? And so I would call the parents in and shame them. But essentially it's like, how are you going to expect your kids to have solid deen if we're not doing it ourselves? We're not leading by example ourselves. We're not showing our kids that we are sadiq and ameen. We're truthful, upright people that they can respect. The reason why it was so easy for Kulthum, Zainab, Fatima radiallahu anha, Ali radiallahu anha, Zayd ibn Haritha, Khadija radiallahu anha, for them to accept Islam so quickly was because they knew the character of the person that was preaching the message. And so the reality is that many of us have been introduced to our Islam through maybe our cultures, maybe through, the random sheikh at the masjid, a random uncle in the front row taught us our Islam, saying you're not praying right, your hands need to be like this, your hands need to be under your navel or on top of your navel or whatever it is. And so many youth, they grow up with these practices, they don't even know what's cultural, what's Islam. They have no idea. I was just talking to an individual yesterday. Allahumma barak, mashallah. He just had a baby daughter. Allahumma barak, mashallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give her a long and pious life. Ameen. And so he asks me, and he's like, what am I supposed to do Islamically now that I've had a daughter? What's the sunnah? So I told him some things, and amongst the things that I told him was aqiqah, which is, on the 7th day that a child is born, you get people together to celebrate, you feed them some food, right? You slaughter an animal, two rams if it's a boy, one if it's two lambs if it's a boy, one if it's a girl. And then amongst the things that you would do is that you shave the head of the child. Okay, you weigh the amount of hair that was on the child's head, and then you give that amount in charity, right, in silver. And so he looked at me and he was like, what are you talking about? He was like, I thought that was like some bid'ah practice that they do in Pakistan. And I was like, Habibi, no, this is authentically established. All four madhahib say to do this. Both male and female, daughter and son. So a lot of times we don't even know what's cultural, what's Islam. We just kind of make assumptions about what's cultural, what's Islam. It's really funny. Do any of you guys know Sheikh Umair from Mihrab Foundation? Some of you guys may know him. He's in Linwood, Sheikh Umair. Great mentor of mine. I love him today. May Allah preserve him. He's amazing. So he has this institute called Mihrab Foundation where they teach, basic fiqh and aqidah and things like that. And me and him always laugh together because we have this commonality that happens that whenever we teach the Hanafi madhab, right, the amount of people that feel relief is really funny. What do I mean by that? When I was back in January, last January, January is coming up, we did a fiqh of salah workshop. And because I learned the Hanafi madhab, not because it's better, right? Not because it's better or it's the haqq or whatever it is. It's just because it's what I learned, right? It's just what I had access to. It's what my teachers taught me. I taught the class in the Hanafi madhab. And just the sigh of relief from some people from the subcontinent, especially, from India and Pakistan background, they were just like, man, I thought like a lot of the things that we were doing was just cultural. But it's good to see that it's actually substantiated in the deen. Right? So first of all, don't degrade yourselves like that. Like have some confidence, You guys are Hanafis. It's the haqq, right? Don't worry, even though I said the opposite, but So that's why it's important, right? It's important people don't even know what's the difference between culture and what's the difference between Islam. Many young folks doubt Islam because they did not even have someone to guide them, someone to engage with them intellectually. And so they get caught up in Ben Shapiro videos and Sam Harris videos and these videos and Richard Dawkins books and all these super intelligent individuals who, honestly, if you spent 1 year studying Islam, you'll be able to debunk everything they said. Everything. I'm not even exaggerating. Everything they say can be debunked after 1 year of learning Islam at a proper institute, like a seminary level. So if you have doubts, go to someone of knowledge. Have a discussion with them. And when you have a discussion with them, you'll begin to experience how jurists came to conclusion. You'll be able to experience the usul at play. You'll be able to experience the different principles. You begin to see that all this is not just randomness. It's carefully crafted. It's a system. And so you begin to appreciate scholarship and Islam a lot more. And Islam, every one of these philosophical questions that are thrown out there. Oh, why does evil exist? Oh, what is subjective truth versus objective truth? How do we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists? How do we know that Prophet ﷺ is a true messenger of God? How do we know all this stuff? It's already been answered. All of these questions have already been answered 1,000 years ago. Not even like 3 years ago. It's all been answered 1,000 years ago. All the things that you see now, I'm just going to be real with you guys. All these things that you see now that are written in the English language, like proofs of prophethood or things like that, that research is not new. They're just translating it from Arabic books. I'm being for real with you. It's not new research. It's the same stuff. It's the same answers. It's just translated into Arabic, from Arabic to English, because it's already been done. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's a great thing because we want to make that education accessible. But what I'm trying to make you guys realize is just appreciate scholarship, right? If you ever have an opportunity to just sit with people of ilm, with people of knowledge, and just listen to them talk, even if you don't understand anything, just listen to what they say. It's amazing. Just watching them go back and forth, and you're just like, I don't understand half of what's going on, but all I know is that clearly these people are very intelligent, and I can trust them. I can trust this deen. Okay, I don't know where I was going with all that ranting, but anyways, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, his loyalty is something that will always be remembered and appreciated. He was there when Rasulullah ﷺ was completely alone. He's the one who walked in the streets of Mecca beside Rasulullah ﷺ. It's all Abu Bakr. He's the one who tried to save him from an assassination attempt. He was the one who was there for him during his migration, where the Prophet ﷺ was most exposed. The most dangerous journey of the Prophet ﷺ's life was the migration from Mecca to Medina. Who was with him? It was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. The story of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the story of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Their paths are parallel. They're always at each other's side. One day, Ali radiallahu anhu was asked by someone, who was braver, you or Abu Bakr as-Siddiq? If you know anything about Ali radiallahu anhu, he was a very brave individual, a very brave warrior. When we get to some of the ghazawat, the battle, like the Battle of Badr, the Battle of Khandaq, Battle of Khaybar, these battles, when we get to those stuff, I'm going to share stories like about Ali radiallahu anhu that will blow your mind about the things that he would do in the battlefield. But Ali radiallahu anhu himself, he said, no, Abu Bakr is more brave than me. He's like, in the Battle of Badr, the situation was so against the Muslims, being outnumbered and outweaponed, like they didn't even have weapons. Some of these people, they just came on the journey just thinking that they were just going to go take a caravan that stole their stuff and bring it back. So some of them didn't even come with weapons. So before the battle started, because it was a battle they weren't prepared for, they were breaking branches off trees. They were doing all this types of, putting some whatever animals that they had with them, trying to make some type of makeshift armor with their fur, whatever they had, whatever possibility they had to just survive. So when the battle commenced, a lot of companions were just like every man for themselves. We just got to, put our head down, fight, and just protect ourselves as much as we can. So Ali radiallahu anhu was saying that everybody was worried about protecting themselves during the Battle of Badr, and when we looked, we saw that there was one man who worried about shielding the Prophet ﷺ more than his own self. He did no shield for himself, and he was the shield of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and it was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. His sacrifice made the Prophet ﷺ's journey so much more rich. So if you ever need to know anything about the honor of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, just look where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed him to be buried. In Medina, in the grave of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there are 3 graves. There is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the front, who is on his right shoulder, facing the Qibla, and then Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is right behind him, and then behind him is who? Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. Right. So whenever we say his name, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, we appreciate his name in this class. We honor his name in this class. In the last speech of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, if there's anyone that I owe in terms of debts, let me know. And so, after that was settled, he says, today I have paid back the debt of everyone except for one. And as soon as he said that, what was amazing is the companions knew exactly what he was talking about. And in the crowd, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq also knew. He puts his head down, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, "Hamalani ila dar al-hijra." Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is the one who carried me to Medina. Allahu Akbar. أنفق علي ماله. He gave me all his wealth. زوجني ابنته. He married me to his daughter. And he was in tears. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was. And Imam Jalaluddin as-Suyuti in his Tarikh al-Khulafa, he says that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq kept weeping and weeping, and he kept saying one thing over and over again. وَهَلْ أَنَا وَمَالِي إِلَّا لَكَ يَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. Allah, what else did Allah give me except for it was you? It was for you, Ya Rasulullah. No man is better after the prophets except for Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. The sacrifices that he made. So after the 124,000 or so prophets, and then amongst them the 313 messengers, and then amongst them the 4 messengers that received the complete book, the Zabur of Dawood alayhi salam, the Torah of Musa alayhi salam, the Injil of Isa alayhi salam, and then the Quran of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the final message and messenger. There was no man who was not a prophet that is better except for Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. He is the best amongst the non-prophets. The sacrifices that he made. One narration tells us that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was talking about the gates of paradise. And so he said, those of you who engage in striving on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's path will be invited to enter the gates of jihad. Those who give charity will enter by the gates of charity. Those who observe fasting will enter by the gates of Bab Rayyan, the Bab of fasting, the gate of fasting. Now pause here for a second. This is beautiful because it teaches us what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't make this path of Jannah one way. There are many different paths that an individual can take in order to enter paradise. This is of the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and knowing His creation, because He created His creation. He knows His creation. Outside of the obligatory, we have 5 prayers a day, we have Hajj, we have fasting, we have the zakat that we give. Everybody's capacity may be different. So, I'll use myself as an example. Fasting is very difficult for me, personally. I love food. I love water. I love it. It's good stuff. So whenever Ramadan rolls around, the first week is like brutal. I have so many headaches. I get really tired. I'm trying to take as many naps as possible to try to get through the day, and then I feel guilty, so then I try not to take naps so that I can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instead, and it's rough. And then you kind of get used to it, you get into the groove, and it's all good, alhamdulillah. So outside of Ramadan, fasting may not be the ibadah that I would turn to on a consistent basis. I might try to find something else that is easier for me, right? So for somebody that might have a lot of difficulty fasting, maybe there's somebody that it's very easy for them to wake up in the night. Or maybe they've been blessed with a lot of wealth, so it's easy for them to give charity. And somebody who is very difficult for them to get up in the middle of the night, they have a lot of ease fasting. Fasting is easy for them, so they can do it every Monday, every Thursday. On the white days, the 13th, 14th, and 15th every month. They're just fasting like it's nonstop. They're just chilling with their fasts. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created different avenues for people to be able to enter paradise. It's beautiful. And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is talking about the different paradise, or the different gates of paradise. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he asks the Messenger of Allah, is it necessary that a person be invited through one of those gates? Will anyone be invited to enter by all of those gates? And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, yes, and I think it's going to be you. And I hope that you will be one of those individuals. So his maqam is special. The early people to accept Islam are the purest of them all. If you ever find a good cause, join it. Don't wait for it to become popular. Right? I still have a little bit more to discuss. We could pause here or we can continue. What do you guys want? Continue? Okay. No, did anyone object to continuing? Like, no, we hate you, get off the stage. No? Okay. All right. Bismillah. There was an individual by the name of Ufayf, who was a powerful leader of Arabia at the time. And he was amongst the individuals who regretted not accepting Islam earlier. He says, I could have been the third. He was a powerful leader, and he went to do business in Mecca with Abbas, the Prophet ﷺ's uncle, who was there doing some trade with him. And while they were sitting there, a man came up to their tent. He faced the Kaaba, and he started to pray. Then there was a woman who came and stood behind the man and prayed along with him. And then there was a young boy who came out and stood to the right of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and prayed with him. And so this Ufayf, he asked questions about what's going on. What is this ritual? And so Abbas told him that this is Muhammad ﷺ, and that the treasures of the emperors of Rome and Persia will be opened for his followers. Allahu Akbar. Right? They're talking about something that is just an unbelievable thing to imagine when there's only 3 or 4 followers of Islam at this point. Right? Very, very few. You know, these narrations, these things, Allah, it gives us hope. It gives us hope that a movement that might be extremely small can have a lot of victory and good. So when we look at our brothers and sisters in Palestine, we hope for the same. To them, to us, it seems unimaginable. Unimaginable that these are going to be the individuals that will lead us in Al-Aqsa, inshallah, very soon. That will lead us in prayer in Al-Aqsa very soon. It seems unimaginable. But just like these 3, 4 followers of the Prophet ﷺ are being told that the emperors of Rome and Persia will be open for you, inshallah ta'ala, the same will happen for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. Allahumma ameen. So he said, this is his wife Khadija, who also believed in him, and that boy that you see is Ali, his cousin, who also believed in him. And so Ufayf, he recalled years later that he wished he had believed on that day so that he could have been amongst one of the earlier companions. Another narration says that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ faced the Qibla and he prayed with Ali radiallahu anhu and Khadija radiallahu anha. And then when he went into ruku', they followed. And then when he stood up, they followed. And when he went into sujood, they followed. And they just kept going until the salah ended. Now today's discussion teaches us something about the sunnah when it comes to introducing people to Islam. Or more importantly, more specifically, when it comes to teaching converts about Islam. When people accept Islam, there are 3 things that is very crucial to teach the individual. Number 1 is loving Allah and His Messenger. You do this through the Quran and the Seerah. 99 names of Allah, knowing who Allah is, reading the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, listening to the Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, learning about it. Because these are the sources of our deen. Allah and His Messenger. This is the backbone of our deen. This is everything. If we don't have Allah and His Messenger, we have no deen. So Allah and His Messenger is our source. So trusting in that source and loving that source is extremely crucial. Now what happens, unfortunately, so that's the first 2 things, right? And then the third thing is what? Is to teach him how to pray. Teach him how to pray. Because that's literally the first thing that Jibreel alayhi salam, after revealing the Quran, taught the Prophet ﷺ how to make wudu and pray. So those are the first things. Okay. Now what happens, unfortunately, is we expect within the 5 minutes that a convert, is now going to what? It's going to, immediately start wearing a hijab, right? Now a beard has to grow in your face immediately. Right? You have to start wearing a thobe. You have to put a kufi on. You have to change your name, which no one says that, by the way. No one says that, okay? If an individual wants to change their name to an Arabic name or whatever Islamic name they want, tfaddal, no problem. But to tell people, to tell John that he has to change his name, he doesn't have to change his name. He doesn't have to change his name at all, right? He can be Imam John. He can be Sheikh Paul. It can happen, no problem. So there's a process to all this, that people who are new to Islam, they need to build a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first, build a love for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, establish salah, and then build their foundation of their deen. Now with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, he was the first man outside of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to accept Islam outside of his family, but he was also the first person to go public with his Islam. He immediately started to spread the message of Islam to his close companions around him. So, of the individuals that accepted Islam under Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, let's see if you can find any commonalities with these names. Of them is Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anh. There's Zubair ibn al-Awwam radiallahu anh. There is Talha ibn Ubaydullah radiallahu anh. Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, and Abu Ubaid ibn Jarrah radiallahu anhum ajma'in. These 6 individuals, they all came from the Prophet, from Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. What are some commonalities between these names? Anybody know? Yes. They're all from the Ashra al-Mubashara. 6 of the 10 Ashra al-Mubashara came directly from the hands of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. These are the 10 companions that are promised paradise. There are more companions that were promised paradise, way more. Majority of them, the vast of them actually, right? Actually, we can go ahead and say all of them were promised paradise. But there's a specific narration that mentions 10 specifically, and of those 10, 6 of them came from the hands of the Prophet of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. And with the narration that Man dalla ala khayran falahu mithlu ajra fa'alayhi, that whoever guides someone to do goodness will have a reward like the one who did it. So whoever guides someone towards good will receive the reward of the good. How many hasanat does Abu Bakr as-Siddiq have? That each 6 of these individuals are a pillar. Each 6 of these individuals have their own story. Each 6 of these individuals are going to be individuals that are essential to the da'wah of Islam. Every single prayer they prayed, every single time they fasted, every single time they made dhikr, every single time they gave charity, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq received that reward. Then amongst the early people that accepted Islam also is Uthman ibn Mad'un. There's Abu Salama ibn Abi Asad. There's Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah, who we mentioned with the Ashra al-Mubashara. There's Arqam ibn Abi Arqam, who the Prophet ﷺ will start teaching out of his home during the secret da'wah, right? In what is known as Darul Arqam. There's Bilal radiallahu anh, was amongst the first people to accept Islam. There's Ammar bin Yasir radiallahu anh, and his parents Sumayya radiallahu anha and Yasir radiallahu anh. Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh was amongst the first people to accept Islam. Some historians identify Ibn Mas'ud as being the 6th person to accept Islam. That there was a story where Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and the Prophet ﷺ were walking together and they were thirsty. So they asked Ibn Mas'ud if there is an animal that they can take so that they can drink some milk. And so Ibn Mas'ud, he was a shepherd, but he was a shepherd of animals that weren't his own animals. So he was basically kind of like a contracting shepherd. Like he would get people that, that have their animals, they didn't want to shepherd on their own because it was a busy, very difficult task. He would do it for them, get a cut from the pie, and then move on. So Ibn Mas'ud, he said, I don't own them, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ asked if there are any animals that have already been milked and is dry. And so he said yes. So he grabbed one of those animals and he gave it to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ took his blessed hands, he rubbed the udder of the animal, and then it filled up with milk. They, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and the Prophet ﷺ both drank to their fill, and they moved on about their day. Ibn Mas'ud, he witnessed this and he realized this individual was someone very special. So he accepted Islam very shortly after. There are many others who accepted Islam some that are well known, some that are not as well known. I did not mention everybody, but these are amongst the main ones. Then after that, the public call was commanded after 3 years of the secret da'wah. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll talk a little bit about what that looked like and why it's important for us to study in current context. Because when the truth from a small group of individuals came about, when it came to light, the Quraysh did everything that they possibly can to stop it. They went through extreme measures, very horrific measures, to try to stop the truth from being brought to light. And with our brothers and sisters in Palestine, this discussion is more relevant than ever. In that no matter how much the people try to extinguish the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will never be able to. Just like the oppression of Musa and Fir'aun. Fir'aun, he did what? He killed every single baby boy, because what was his fear? He saw a dream that he was going to be overthrown by a man that will come in the future. So after seeing that, he killed every single baby boy that he can get his hands on. Except one. And that one was who? So baby Musa alayhi salam, that he took into his own home, or Asya alayhi salam did, the wife of Pharaoh, brought him into his own home, raised him, educated him. And that boy that he was so scared of, that Pharaoh was so worried about, was who? It was Musa. He was the one who overthrew Pharaoh. So it doesn't matter how much, whatever you try to do, how many people you try to kill, how many masajid you try to target, how many hospitals you try to target, how many journalists you try to target, how many cell towers you bring down, how many times you cut the internet, the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come to light. We have no problem worrying, we have no problem in that, and we don't even worry about it. We know that's going to happen. We know that it's always going to be true. And inshallah ta'ala, the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is spreading not only across the Muslim world, but it's also spreading amongst the Western world. So many people are interested in Islam. So many people are reading the Quran, just witnessing the faith of our brothers and sisters in Gaza. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them for that. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make that heavy on their skills. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them victory. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala foil the plot of the oppressors. Allahumma ameen. Subhanakallahumma bihamdak. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfirukallah wa natubu ilayk. Do we have any questions, inshallah ta'ala? There's an online question here. Somebody asked about adoption. Someone's asking about adoption and the permissibility of adoption. They said they've heard before that adoption is not something that is encouraged in Islam. Okay, Bismillah. With this mas'ala specifically, the question of adoption, about 100, 200 years ago, when Orientalism became very rampant, many Orientalists who are not well versed in Islam started translating the Quran, translating books of fiqh, translating Seerah. And they did these things where it's like literal word-for-word translations from Arabic to English, without understanding proper Islamic terms, what they mean, how they impact law, the fact that some sciences of Islam will mean different things, right? So the word sunnah doesn't mean the same thing in every single field. And this field of hadith, what does sunnah mean? Field of hadith, sunnah means a word, action, or silent approval of the Prophet Muhammad. But in the field of fiqh, What does it mean? It means something that is highly recommended, but not at the level of obligatory, or not at the level of obligatory. Right? So they mean different things in different sciences. However, someone who doesn't have a grasp of that is going to what? Is going to translate it as the same word in both contexts. So a good part of those translations were also done by professors, English professors, English and Arabic professors in the English language, and then they were disseminated amongst the Muslim world. So Egypt, India, other parts of the Muslim world, they received a lot of these translations of Orientalists translating these books into other languages, right? Into French, into Hindu, into Urdu. So as a consequence, some earlier translations in the past like 150, 200 years, you will find a huge amount of them having extremely gross mistranslations. Okay? Now the reason I bring all of that is because this is one of these issues, where as a result of these mistranslations, people have come to hear that adoption is haram. This is absolutely incorrect. Not even a sliver of truth. Not even a little bit of truth. Adoption is 100% permissible in Islam. It's actually recommended. Prophet ﷺ told us that the one who takes care of an orphan is what? Him and I are like this in paradise, right? He put his two fingers together, right? Now, these mistranslations, the reason they occurred is because of the terminology. If I remember the term correctly, it's something called at-tabanni, which is what? To make someone your son. So this is a concept. Because it comes from the word ibn. So at-tabanni means to claim someone as your biological son. Now, Rasulullah ﷺ, this is what was changed. When we talked about Zayd ibn Muhammed, and then the Quran was sent down and said that no, you can't claim him as your biological son. So that was what was the problem. That's what's impermissible. Calling someone who is not your biological son or daughter and claiming them as your biological son or daughter is what's impermissible, not adoption. The problem is that these Orientalist translations, they made them one and the same. This is the same thing, right? So when you refer to someone as your adopted son, then you're clearly acknowledging that they're not your biological son. And also in our deen, if someone is adopted, we don't hide that from them. Right? We don't hide that from them. How many movies and TV shows did we watch growing up of kids finding out that they were adopted by their parents like 20 years later or 10, 15 years later or something like that, and it causes them to have a crisis and they go and try to find their true lineage and things like that. It was like the number one plot of every 2000s movie and show for some reason, right? But in our deen, we don't have that concept. It's actually impermissible. You're not supposed to hide that from any adopted son or daughter. They have a right to know their lineage. They have a right to know who their parents are, and if they're able to, and if it's appropriate for them to meet their parents, it's a good action as well. So yeah, so it just has to do with the definition of tabanni and it being mistranslated quite significantly. Wallahu a'lam. Question: how many prophets were sent to the people of Israel? Also, why do Christians believe that Palestine belongs to the Jewish faith? Do you know? I refrain from answering questions that are about other faiths, just because I would hate to have a Christian or someone of any faith stand up here and start preaching about Islam. I think it's absurd, right? Why are you trying to tell me about the deen that you don't even believe in? So you're coming with a certain bias already. So forgive me, but I'm not going to answer that question about why they believe that or things that they believe. However, how many prophets were sent to the people of Israel? I know there was a specific number, but I don't remember that number. Can anybody look it up for me real quick? I think I can probably find it real quick. Wikipedia says 48. So the number is not clear, but if we're looking at the prophets in the Quran themselves, then it will be no less. I'm seeing 13, 16, and 20, but I don't know exactly which one, but around that. Around that, inshallah. Any other questions before we conclude? All right, tamam. جزاك الله خير everyone. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك اللهم ونتوب إليك. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I will see you guys inshallah next week.